Hey guys, thanks for tuning in again. If you guys don't know me, my name is Cube, and today we're gonna talk about the dark side of Space Marine 2's community. First and foremost, I really want to apologize for the wait you guys had to go through. I teased this video coming up, I think, 1.5 weeks ago, and I already had the script laid out, the background footage recorded. I just needed to do my voiceover and talk about my opinion. But currently, it's pretty hot where I live. Um, so it was really hard just sitting down for maybe 2 or 3 hours to just finalize the video because it's 30 plus degrees every single day, even during night times. And I'm gonna be honest, I didn't feel like suffering. It, I did not want to suffer through this, even though I really wanted to publish the video because it's already basically done for like 2 weeks. But I just didn't find the time and actually the strength to push through it. But here we are, and let's finally talk about the dark side of the community. One thing I've noticed following the Space Marine 2 community, and unfortunately also the subreddit and the forums, is how quickly online discussions turn negative actually, especially on Reddit. Now, don't get me wrong, I think criticism is quite important. Every game has issues, and players absolutely have the right to voice their opinions and concerns. I think without feedback, developers wouldn't know what to improve on. But sometimes I feel like this conversation just goes far beyond constructive criticism. A single balance change gets announced, and suddenly the whole community turns to chaos, and everyone says the game is dying because it's not the way it was before. I feel like the problem isn't criticism itself. I feel like the problem is the tendency to treat every change as chaos. What starts as a reasonable concern can quickly evolve into something bad, where the loudest and most dramatic opinions get the most attention. Negative posts receive more engagement, more comments, more visibility, which can create this impression that everyone is unhappy, even when many players are still enjoying the game on a regular basis. And I think that's where things become misleading. If a newer player visits the Space Marine 2 community, especially in Reddit, after a controversial update, let's just say patch 13.0, for example, they might think the game is completely chaos. Then they proceed to play the game, log in, you find lobbies, matchmaking works, everyone's still enjoying the game, everyone's still playing the game. Sometimes the reality often is far less dramatic than the discussion surrounding it. I feel like Reddit tends to amplify extremes, like the most positive opinions rise to the top, but so do the negative ones. And the middle ground, the normal player base, that maybe think, okay, the update was decent, but of course imperfections are always a possibility. These opinions often get drowned out. I feel like for Space Marine 2, this creates a strange situation where every update feels like a battle between, okay, the game is saved after an update, or the game is ruined, with very little room for nuance. And honestly, that's what I think the dark side of the community is. It's not criticism, it's not feedback, but it's the constant overreacting that turns every patch note into a crisis. Because when every update is treated like the end of the world for the game, meaningful criticism starts to lose its impact. One of the biggest discussions I've seen on Reddit over the time of like searching for rants and comments. One thing I saw was the Stunlock situation. Now, before you guys jump into the comments, and I know Stunlocks are real, they exist. They are just enemy combinations that really punish you hard, especially on the highest difficulty. But I disagree with the discussion at some point. Many players talk about the situation as if it's unavoidable, as if the game just decided that you're gonna die in that situation and you couldn't have done it differently. From my experience, that's not really the truth. I play mostly exclusively on Absolute. Of course, everyone gets caught in a bad situation sometimes, but it's pretty rare. It's not because I'm some god tier player, but because over the time I've played this game, I learned which habit gets me killed and which doesn't. And one of the biggest examples for that was gun striking every opportunity. A lot of players develop this muscle memory of taking every gun strike the moment it appears, and the problem is on absolute difficulty, positioning matters more than damage from the gun strike in that situation. Sometimes taking that gun strike locks you into an animation while multiple enemies are preparing to attack you. The result is after the gun strike you get staggered and suddenly you're in the exact stunlock situation people complain about. The issue wasn't the gun strike itself, the issue was the decision to take it in that situation. The same applies to parrying. Many players try to parry everything, every attack, every enemy, at every time. But sometimes The better play is to parry one attack and dodge out, create space, reposition, and then re-engage. Absolute difficulty constantly asks players to adapt instead of following a fixed pattern that they learned over time. And that's where I think a lot of the frustration comes from. When players hit a wall, the first reaction is often to blame the game, but sometimes the game is actually asking you to change your approach towards the game. That doesn't mean every death is fair. Of course not. That doesn't mean the game is perfect, and it certainly doesn't mean that there aren't balance issues worth discussion. But not every frustrating mechanic is automatically bad design. Sometimes it's actually just a skill check, and sometimes the solution is adapting rather than another patch. Another complaint I constantly see is the ranged enemy spam. Whether it's Tyranids or Chaos, there are always posts talking about how overwhelming ranged enemies are and how they make the game feel frustrating. Now I can understand where some of the criticism comes from. Chaos in particular has few enemies that want to engage you directly in melee combat, and a lot of their threat comes from range pressure, which naturally just feels way more annoying because you're constantly taking chip damage while you're trying to deal with everything else happening on the screen. But I think a lot of players are missing one important detail. Space Marine 2 isn't balanced around everyone fighting whatever enemy happens to be standing directly in front of them. It's balanced around team play, and on absolute difficulty I think target priority becomes one of the most important skills in the game as a team. Let's just imagine a fairly standard team comp. Maybe a tactical, a bulwark, and a heavy. Now an enemy wave appears, with medium majors pushing towards you and ranged enemies sitting in the back. Who should be dealing with what? In my opinion, the bulwark should be the one engaging the melee threats and controlling the space for his tactical and heavy. Meanwhile, tactical and heavy should be looking for opportunities to eliminate the ranged enemies that are trying to apply pressure from the distance. The problem starts when all three players tunnel vision onto the melee enemies. Suddenly nobody's dealing with the ranged threats, nobody's killing them, and now the entire team is wondering why they're getting chipped down and losing their armor. At that point the issue isn't necessarily the enemy spam or the AI director, it's just that the enemy priority broke down. Every class has threats it handles better than others. You wouldn't want heavy getting swarmed by 16 melee majors, because that's just not what the class is built for. A lot of successful absolute runs aren't won because the players have the perfect aim or insane mechanics. They are won because everyone understands their role and deals with the enemies that pose the biggest threats to the team. Now, if we're talking about true solo absolute, that's a different conversation entirely. When you're playing alone, you don't have teammates covering your weaknesses. You don't have someone deleting enemy ranged units while you're busy in melee combat. You don't have a bulwark creating space for you, and you have to solve the problem on your own. In that environment, range pressure can absolutely feel more oppressive depending on your class. Let's just be honest here, the average player isn't doing true solo absolute runs. Most players are running the mission in online lobbies with two teammates. And in those situations, I think the discussion around ranged enemy spam often ignores how much the problem can be solved just through teamwork, positioning, and proper target priority. Not every frustrating experience is a balance problem. Sometimes it's just a player's responsibility problem. Another topic that keeps resurfacing is the cape grind. I personally kind of feel bored by it at some point, and I already made a video about it. If you guys want to check it out, I'm gonna leave it in the description below. Even after the hotfix of patch 13.0, which was 13.1, people are still arguing that the requirements are too extreme and that the cape grind feels terrible. And honestly, I think a lot of players are just approaching these rewards the wrong way. Like, these caves were never designed to be completed in a weekend. They weren't introduced as a short-term objective that you're supposed to farm as quickly as possible. They were long-term progression rewards, meant to exist alongside the game's ongoing support. And we already know Space Marine 2 is receiving long-term content support for another year, and these rewards were clearly designed around that philosophy. They're meant to reward consistent engagement with the game's hardest content over time. If you're someone who regularly plays absolute difficulty, switches between classes, and simply enjoys the game, you're naturally making progress towards these rewards anyway. But if you treat the caves like a checklist and decide to grind 50 missions back to back solely for the cosmetic, of course it's gonna feel exhausting. Almost any progression system becomes miserable when you force yourself to speedrun it. That doesn't mean the system is perfect, it doesn't mean the numbers couldn't be adjusted, but I think there's a difference between the reward takes time and the reward is bad. Sometimes a reward is intended to represent long-term commitment rather than immediately completion. Constructive criticism is how games improve and give them longevity. Reporting bugs, broken perks, balance problems, and unintended interactions is incredibly valuable for us. What I struggle with is the constant doom posting. If every update is a disaster, every mechanic is terrible, and every design decision is proof that the developers don't understand their own game, then eventually meaningful criticism just gets lost in the noise. We should be trying to improve Space Marine 2 and not convince everyone that the game is beyond saving. At the end of the day, Space Marine 2 is definitely not a perfect game. There are bugs, there are balance issues, and there are perks that don't work as intended. There are mechanics that deserve criticism and systems that can still be improved upon. And players should absolutely continue giving feedback, because constructive criticism is one of the reasons that the game actually has improved so much since launch. But somewhere along the way, parts of the discussion stopped being about improving the game and started becoming about proving that the game is bad. Every update became a disaster and every balance change became another crisis. Every difficult mechanic became evidence that the developers don't know what they're doing, and honestly I think the Dark Side of Space Marine 2's community is not criticism or negativity, because criticism asks how something can be improved upon. Negativity assumes it's already broken. Those are not the same things. I spent hundreds of hours playing this game, experienced the stunlocks, I fought the ranged enemy waves, I worked towards long-term rewards, and while I understand many of the complaints, I've also learned that a lot of the problems people talk about aren't always solved by a patch. Sometimes they're solved by adapting, and sometimes they're solved by teamwork. Sometimes they're just solved by changing habits we've built over hundreds of hours. And sometimes they're not problems at all. The truth is, Space Marine 2 is still one of the most enjoyable Warhammer games we've had over the last years. It's a game that continuously receives support, continues to receive updates, and continues to have a passionate community that cares enough to argue about it every single day. So if there's one thing I would like to take away from this video, it is keep criticizing the game, keep reporting bugs, keep giving feedback, but don't let every conversation become another reason to hate something you're supposed to enjoy. Because if we all do is focus on what's wrong, eventually we will forget why we started playing in the first place. Maybe some of the things I've said in this video will be unpopular. Maybe some people will completely disagree with me, and that's fine. A healthy community isn't one where everyone agrees. It's one where people can disagree without immediately assuming the other side is stupid or delusional or is ruining the game. Space Marine 2 deserves criticism when criticism is warranted. But it also deserves credit when it gets things right. And I think sometimes we forget that. And if you made it this far, thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate you guys, and let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. I will definitely check up on it. Until then, see you in the next one.